Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TrailBlazers podcast. This is a really good one we got for you today. Usually we have on a engineer taking a non-traditional route, just a couple of years out of university. But today we have Chris Fetterly, not an engineer. He has a PhD in materials chemistry, and he is currently the VP at Future Fields, which does Cellular Agriculture, a startup company here in Edmonton. Super interesting. And between those 2 points, he's taken a lot of twists and turns along his career. You'll hear him talk about how he spent some years just snowboarding and how that was really important for him. He was the director of the Student Innovation Center at the University of Alberta, where I met him, and immediately knew that me and him were kind of on the same page about a lot of things, kind of a growth mindset and everything like that. And he has a really unique perspective because he got to witness a lot of students go through that innovation center and develop their own ideas and do creative things and kind of shape their future careers by being creative and trying new things when they were actually in university. So he has that perspective as well as himself. He has a really interesting journey where he draws a lot of advice from, and he's very articulate, thinks a lot about, why he does the things he does and, why you should pursue certain things and everything like that. So I definitely think you guys are going to get a lot out of listening to Chris today. What did you think of it, Dave?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I felt like Chris had a lot of really good perspectives, kind of more deep thinking. If I had one word I could probably describe the whole episode with, it would be just like defining your why. And I think Chris has kind of spent a lot of time really thinking about the why, and even some of the stories that he was sharing with yourself and myself on taking time to snowboarding and like just doing stuff like that and like finding value out of things like that. Because I mean, even some things that I find too within society these days is like it's very linear, right? It's like, okay, I'm at this job and then I'm going to be here for like X amount of time and then I want to advance my career and go to this job. Whereas I mean, like Chris is basically just like, no, like sometimes you should just like stop and snowboard and like take a break for a while, right? And I appreciate like when we can take the time to really do some like critical reflection and kind of think about like what we're doing at that particular point in time. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy Chris's episode because he brings out a lot of these elements of why self-reflection is important and like how it actually can help you in your long run of maybe like finding meaning and like, focus with your life. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy the episode. And without further ado, here we go. Pretty interesting. Chris, do you mind like introducing a little bit about what your like Future Fields is working on right now? I mean, I got a little bit of an introduction, but I'd definitely be interested to learn more about like the company and kind of like the work that you guys are working on.
Yeah, I can do that for sure. How familiar are you with lab-grown meat in general? Does that mean anything to you?
I mean, it does, but I mean, like so for my personal background is like this. I am a chemical engineer first, a computer process control engineer second, and now I'm doing machine learning. So I'm like, but I never have ever taken a biology class in high school or university.
Man, I got science 10 and that's it. So we're going to have to start at the very basics on this one.
Tyler, were you a physics and chem guy too then, or what?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so we're the same.
10.
Yeah, we're
I know that plants absorb sunlight and turn it into energy. That's the limit of my biology knowledge.
Yeah, so there's this cool thing that's happening, and it's been happening for a while, and it's collectively called cellular agriculture, right? The layman kind of phrase is lab-grown meat that you grow in a lab. The idea is, you take some cells from an animal, it's super small biopsy, they don't even feel it. You put those cells in a growth medium, and they replicate and grow, and then after a while you can differentiate them into the type of tissue you're interested in, fat or muscle, and then after that you can potentially structure this meat into meat, so you can grow meat outside of the animal. So that's lab-grown meat in a nutshell. And so what we're doing specifically is lab-grown meat is really expensive. The first one was 2013. That was Mark Post, Sergey Brin funded that project, but it was several $100,000s to make a burger. So it's
an expensive burger.
You can't do it, right? Yeah. So that was the first one. So, but some of the big barriers that were revealed over time for cell ag is the reliance on I briefly said that growth media that we have to put cells in. Like they have to grow in kind of a nutrient broth, right? You feed animals something, well, you got to feed cells something too. So they grow in a nutrient broth. We call that a growth media. And then there's a number of ingredients that go in that growth media. And that growth media is wicked expensive. And so there are some very specific proteins in there that are responsible for the high cost of that media. So we make those proteins. And we make them in an interesting, novel way, and we can do it sustainably and cost effectively and scalably. And this is important if we're actually going to get meat that's going to be price parity on the table. You want a chicken nugget that costs the same as a chicken nugget. You don't want to pay $30 for this, right? So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. The one-liner I normally use for people who are more familiar with science is I say we make cost-effective, sustainable, and species-specific growth factors. So that's what we do. But the other way to say it is we make the most important ingredient for lab-grown meat.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah, I like that idea. That's an area, domain that I don't know much about, but you can just tell it's one of those things that's going to really take over in the next however many years here. As you guys build like a more sustainable process like you are right now. So that's what you guys do. I'm also interested in like you specifically. What's your role with the company, and what is especially because you're at a startup, and I know at a startup it's hard to have a very defined role. You probably wear a lot of different hats a lot of the time, but what does your day-to-day look like, and what part of the company do you take care of?
Yeah, so my day-to-day now is I'm the VP of Business Development, right? But when I started, I was hired as Senior Research and Development, so it definitely has changed over time. Like my day-to-day is figuring out who are good companies that we can work with, how can we partner to create value, what are the customers that I can find who might want to adopt and build with our product, all the relationship developing aspects of the business. This is where I invest my time now is having good conversation and then having conversations that can create value on both sides of the table. So I know it's a lot of fluffy speak. You hear the word business development, and it's like, what is that? It's this nebulous catch-all term, right? But I've come to really enjoy it. I've come to really love, spending my time talking to people and forging relationships that can reap compound interest over time for companies, right?
Yeah, for sure. Tyler, go ahead.
I think that's a really, really interesting that you've ended up, in the position you are, doing the job that you are, because, and I'm gonna make a brief connection here because
sure, yeah.
I told Dave, like when we started this project, and I messaged you about this, Chris, about what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
We're trying to kind of extract, roadmaps from people that have gone in non-traditional directions and kind of provide that as a bit of a guide or as a bit of an example to people that, have these traditional set of career paths and maybe they don't feel like it's for them. They want to do other things.
Sure.
And I told Dave when we were starting this out, I said, what really influenced me a lot and what I kind of envision us kind of doing the same thing as like a Tim Ferriss style podcast. And I know when I met you for the first time, the thing I noticed is not only we had like a great conversation and, you seem very purposeful and open-minded about the Student Innovation Center, but you had the big 400-page Tribe of Mentors book on your desk at the time. And I saw that. Yeah. I remember that. I was like, me and Chris are speaking the same language here. Like, I was just like, we're on the same page. And then the conversation went exactly how I expected to. It went great. But anyway, we wanted to so sorry, that's just the connection I wanted to make between the three of us. But I wanted to dive into kind of, now you are where you are. You're doing VP Business Development at the Cellular Agriculture Company. I'm wondering, you come from an extremely technical background, so maybe if you would walk us through from your education to your career steps, the high level 30,000-foot overview, how you ended up where you are now, because it takes a very, it veers off course rather than what you would expect when you first started your education, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I could tell you that I sat down when I was going into university and I charted a path and I followed that path. Now, that was definitely not the case for me. So yeah, big technical background. I guess the brief story is my undergrad. I started my undergrad, and like most undergrads, I think, is I didn't know why I was in university. Why am I here? I'm following the trope, right? I thought I was going to be a dentist. I explored that opportunity. Didn't pan out. Grades started slipping. I could see no connection to the future from where I was. And so I left. I stopped university 2.5 years in. And that was during my undergrad. And then that was soul searching time. That was a lot of snowboarding, that was working weird jobs in Fort McMurray, that was tree planting, that was you name it, right? And through some serendipity, I met a friend, and I had worked up north, and he started talking my ear off about, well, what are you doing next? And I said, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to go back. And he said, you've always been kind of a technology guy, right? You like problems? Well, I'm going to go to BCIT. You should check out some of their programs. And so I did, and there was a few that I found interesting. Or one was electrical and computer engineering technology. So not an engineer, but you can be a technologist, it's called. And it was in automation and instrumentation, and I don't know, something with the word automation. I got excited, and I've always been a bit of a tech geek, and so I went and did that. I did 3 years at BCIT. I did a co-op diploma. I've done everything from soldering circuit boards to high voltage power rectifiers, and then I got a job very quickly after that at a consulting firm back in Prince George, in my hometown. It's BCIT's in Vancouver, so I went down to Vancouver, then I went back to PG. I worked as a professional technologist doing all sorts of process control and high level engineering that I thought was interesting at the time, and it wore on me. I got sick of it. I don't know how else to say it, but like I felt like I'd plateaued already. Like I'm not growing here. This isn't interesting. Maybe I could have dug in deep and really got into it, but so I started, what's next? I got to do something else. So I had half a degree, and I started looking back at my old university, and I was like, there's some cool programs there, and I like this. I like science. I want something more focused on people and helping people, shaping this distribution of what I wanted to kind of do, right? And so I ended up going into health sciences because I had most of the prereqs, and I thought after that I could look at med school, or I could look at something more directly related to human well-being. I was helping pulp mills get better at making pulp, and that's important, don't get me wrong, but at the time it wasn't doing it for me. So I finished the health sciences degree. I also did undergrad research. I liked research. I liked it a lot. My supervisor at the time recommended UofA if I was ever interested in grad studies. Who knows what that was. And then as I was finishing that up, my partner, she was also getting a little bit, at the end of her job, she didn't really like it, and we were looking around for what's next. And then I, for some reason, and I don't know where, I can't pinpoint the start point, but I became fascinated with the word nanotechnology, and I became enamored with nano everything. And I was like, well, where can I learn nanoscience, like nanomedicine even? Where can I do that? And I found a couple options at UofA in chemistry. And so I said, honey, there's some cool stuff here. I think it's neat. I want to go. And she said, great, there's a cool company there that can give me a better job that I really like. Let's just go to Edmonton. So I applied, I got in. 5 years later, PhD in surface science and nanomaterials, and a rocky road throughout that. And then afterwards, I got the job where I met you, Tyler. I was immediately out of my PhD. I ended up in the Student Innovation Center because, over the time I'd cultivated my relationship with entrepreneurship, and I felt that, founding and starting and building new things is very important. And then after 2 years there, I had an opportunity I couldn't refuse to work for Future Fields. So here I sit. That's a long, meandering pathway.
What a journey it is, all the twists and turns along the way. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I know you want to try and tease out things. We talk about Tim Ferriss, and he's a master at the ability to kind of pull out patterns, right? And I tried to ask myself, what are my patterns? What am I interested in? Why did I take this winding path, right? And I think it's because I've always kind of chose opportunity over fear. That's a phrase I've borrowed, but when there's something interesting, and if I take that, I'm saying no to a bunch of other things. There's the fear of missing out that comes in when you're committing to something, right? So I've chosen to kind of frame things that way, and I guess I just tried to like over time be more and more true to myself about like what am I really interested in, like what am I really good at. And as I went through each one of these different roles, I would kind of peel away more layers and finding out like, oh, you don't really like this stuff. Oh, you're kind of good at this. And it just kind of shaped my life in that direction. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's a really, really important point, and I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head there. In that, you get into situations where it's a lot of uncertainty or unknowns.
Yeah.
There's going to be pieces of you that maybe you kind of have to leave behind, or pieces of you that have to grow, or you have to adapt in a certain way. And I think it's really important to, be more honest with yourself about what you do want to do. And, if you're uncomfortable, I think you develop a zone of comfort. You'll kind of create this almost second caricature of yourself where you kind of lie to yourself that you like what you're doing just to stay in that zone of comfort. But it seems for you've always just kind of, like you said, just like, you haven't let that kind of fear dominate your life. You've just gone at new opportunities over and over again without really knowing what they'll hold. Because like that example you gave when you were taking time off and doing snowboarding and this and that and the other thing, like that's all feedback, right? So yeah. It's like, I think like, even though it seems like if you look back on your life, it's like, oh, maybe I just not wasted some years, but didn't do much with it. You probably grew a lot during that time, right? Would you say that as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. There in all of these periods of my life that are not immediately apparently relevant to what I'm doing now, like there's tremendous periods of growth. I remember saying to a friend when I started working at Future Fields, like a startup, I said, I feel like I am using every single piece of my experience in this company so far. That was when I started as research and development. I was quite new, right? So I was pulling pieces of knowledge from BCIT, and I was leaning heavily on what I'd learned in my undergrad in life sciences, and just taking all of my experiences and trying to help shape, myself into a generalist, right? A technical generalist, but a good one. Like I can speak the language of science well. As Sam Altman says this a lot, you can go broad in life, right? Or you can go deep, right? And you can partially in between go a little broad and deep on a few subjects. I've always been the type of person, like I find it hard to go very deep on things, right? I have this infatuation that I should, because that's where mastery is, right? It's somewhere down there, deep in a hole that I need to spend 10,000 hours on. But I've just been better at going a little bit broad and a little deep on some things, and it just plays more to maybe my lack of patience or just my interest in my constant living in the future. Like my brain is just not here; it's always somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say, to be honest, like the one thing I was kind of thinking about a lot, or like the one word that sort of came to my mind when I was listening to you talk about just your transition and your journey so far is maybe just curiosity to some extent, right? Like I feel like, even for say like some of the choices that you've made and like things, I feel like, probably just like the curious brain, and like I can definitely relate to that too. I think there's just like, like you're saying, you heard the word nanotechnology and it's like, oh my goodness, it seems like a great kind of, thing of the future, and you kind of have the opportunity to continue learning about it. So for me, kind of one of the things that I'm wondering about is that, so you've had quite a few different roles so far, and
sure.
So say like when you were at BCIT, and then when you were working afterwards in like automation process control, and then PhD innovation center, and then now with the startup, have you seen any common skills or traits that have sort of followed you through all of these different opportunities? Like perhaps it could be like communication skills, or anything that you can kind of see or like map between those different roles so far.
Oh, that's a great question. Like for me right now, I reap the benefit of any time I've spent on improving social skills, right? So I have felt that over time I can handle a good conversation, and I can make quick friends with folks. And I generally do well in social situations, and I know how to handle them, and I'm more outgoing than I originally thought I was. Like I have the capability to walk up to three strangers in a conference and say, hey, I'm here alone. Mind if I join the conversation? Like, that's hard for a lot of people to do. But I've had that ability for a very long period of time. And I don't know where it started. And I think that ability to have a good conversation and be genuine with people that you haven't met before, to some extent, has benefited me tremendously. The other less obvious one, I think, for me is just like, how to say, a basic mechanical aptitude for hands-on building and exploring. I have used this throughout my life. It's this, the feeling of a MacGyver, being a MacGyver, like pulling out duct tape and taping together, like being able to rapidly make solutions and quickly scab together an idea with some paper and some tape and whatever you have at your disposal, and not being afraid to tackle something that, like, the skill looks like it's beyond you. Like, I'll buy an Arduino. Am I a software programmer? No, but I'm pretty confident I can get an Arduino. I can find a tutorial and figure out how to make it control my garage door. Like, I'm confident in my ability that I can learn when I need to learn, right? So that has always served me very well, is this Carol Dweck's growth mindset, if you will. I think I have that, but I'm like kind of biased here to apply that to myself, right?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's a good point. And, you have a really unique perspective as well because of your time directing the Student Innovation Center. So not only do you have that ability to be MacGyver and just learn things and do things and have that hands-on ability, you've watched plenty of student groups try to do the same thing while they were in university. I'm wondering, what were some key takeaways or lessons that you learned from your time there, and what were some things that you saw from those student groups that participated in that innovation center that you saw was really, a rewarding experience for them, or something that, they could utilize later on in their careers that they were learning while they were there?
Yeah, okay. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, some cherished moments for me there is when I saw students connecting and forming community and mentoring one another, coaching one another through an interesting challenge that they just met when they're trying to build widget A, B, C, or D. What I guess seeing people go on a limb and trying something that's like, why am I doing it? I'm a little nervous. I don't know if I can run this organization. I don't know if I can create this, right? Like, you can, and you don't have to do it alone. Like, let me walk over there and introduce you to my friend here. He's very good at programming, and the two of you can have a conversation about how you're going to build this organization. And then after that, we're going to have a pizza party, and so I can kind of like quarterback it a little bit and sort of shape the social situation. But ultimately, it's up to students to reap the benefits, right? And I don't know. Things I took away from there was like, it's really scary for students to start things that are outside of the traditional pathway that doesn't line up with the degree, because the incentives aren't always aligned, right? Like, Tyler, you're a sitting example of this, right? Like, how much time did you spend in Alberta Sat? Oh my gosh, right? This is a student group building satellites. All right.
I think the way I put it is that, like, I spent too much time on it to not do something with my career afterwards. It would have been just ridiculous to not go into the space industry, or at least try to, after all that time invested in it.
Exactly.
It would have been sunk cost otherwise, right?
Well, yeah, and we could talk about sunk costs later. Like, sacrifice, right? Like, I saw tremendous sacrifice I saw students who were just like, they had a midterm, but they were working on the widget. All right. And, I'll come up to them and say, you got to work on your midterm, right? Like, you paid for a very expensive movie ticket. You should probably do that midterm. Like, oh, I just got to finish this. If I could get through it, then it'll work. And there's a lot of students that reap the benefit from those sacrifices. But yeah, I'm kind of rambling. I should go back to the main question. Is like, takeaways that I took out of there just like for students, finding your tribe, right? Tribe finding and being willing to like get out there and stand alone and invite someone in when you're building something. And that I've seen several times when students are very afraid to put themselves out there and say, hey, I want to build this widget, but I'm not really sure what I'm doing. Does anyone want to do this with me? And I've seen that work so well. I have lots of little anecdotes in there for sure. But the side projects that were built in that space were tremendous. They're projects. I had students come back to me afterwards, probably a year ago, and they said, man, I wish I would have spent more time in there with you, or with the center in general. I wish I would have spent more time focusing on some of these other interests I had. Now I'm doing this job that I hate, right? I wish I would have spent more time exploring the future. I don't know, really long-winded answer, Tyler, but it's hard to take away like big lessons from that space holistically when there were so many small micro lessons that were happening all the time that were just so interesting. What I always tried to do with that space was build community, and like that's finding a community, finding a tribe, finding the people you want to be around. Who you surround yourself by is so important to how your life trends and develops, right? And where you live and where you physically locate. So creating an environment like that where students could reap the benefits of being surrounded by innovative, creative people, that was a cherished experience for me.
I feel like, there's so many kind of like little anecdotes of wisdom in there. Like I like kind of the stories of basically, helping students like maybe overcome the fear of the social pressure they felt with just say like, some guy's a programmer, some guy's in a business, and they all have these ideas. But I kind of like that idea that you're talking about of along the lines of community building. Do you think maybe say like throughout all of your previous experiences and like, how you're mentioning now that the social communication skill, it gets continually improved over time and how that's like impacted yourself, like how can say like a student right now or somebody who's a young professional, you think like grow their social skills or grow their social abilities to, maybe not become like an extrovert, for example, sure, but just be more open and able to communicate effectively within a workplace or maybe within, like relationships or friendships?
Yeah, I don't know how to cultivate that skill if it goes against your nature. Like some folks really strongly identify with the word introvert, right? But for a student, I can say what probably worked well for me is like I've always been drawn to clubs, to starting them, to getting in an executive position because I always knew that was important, to like having some ownership. Like, every single institution I was at, I started a club, that's for sure. And so that was, I reaped the benefits of that. You get to know so many people and you're talking constantly. So yeah, getting involved in any club you can think of that is remotely related to your interests and trying things out. Just by nature of interacting with more and more people, one would hope you would improve your social skills over time. There are times where I think you might want to sit down and reflect on like how specifically can I improve my ability to market myself? How can I sell myself? I was not so methodical in improving my social skills. If there is such a thing as coming naturally to you, that's how I describe it. It's like I've never had a problem talking to people, and so I don't necessarily know how to make it easier for folks who do have problems talking to people. But I can say that like generally, the fears build up in your mind in these irrational scenarios. Like I'm gonna go over there and they're gonna tell me that I look funny, right? Like that never happens. Ever. Like we let our minds just run away with the worst possible outcomes, and don't give ourselves the chance to have a good outcome.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because, and I think the more often that like you have those irrational fears and you go and do that thing, you realize that they're irrational. It's almost like a muscle that you work and it gets stronger and stronger, and you can keep it strong by continuing to do those things. And you mentioned earlier that your goal is to, you know, have a genuine connection or a genuine conversation with the other person. So if you go into it focused on that goal, it might alleviate a little bit of like focusing on that irrational fear.
Yeah.
I did want to. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh yeah, you highlighted kind of my approach. Like, you can go into a conversation with a transactional approach to it, like, I've got to get something from you, or you can go into it where the point is, I just want to have a good conversation and I want to forge a bit of a relationship. And the latter is the one that will always reap benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I read an article online, and I was hoping you would expand on it a little bit for us.
Yeah.
And so your personal mantra is strong opinions loosely held.
Yeah.
So what does this mean, and how has this played a role in your career thus far?
Oh, you found that article, did you?
Yeah. We do our homework.
You're like trying to hide it in like the deep web, or what, Chris?
No, that phrase has been really important to me over time. Basically, it's a nice way to add like a scientific lens to this feeling of having an open mind, but it opens it up more to saying having an open mind and being open to having a change, right? Which I don't think everyone is open to having their mind changed. So that's strong opinions loosely held, is mean like I'm operating on the best data that I have for my hypothesis or my opinion, and you know, I have some conviction on that this is the best way to go about this because of these things I've learned, but I'm not so married to this idea or this process that if some better information came along or I sought out better information, that I wouldn't change the way I do something. You know, that's a great question you can ask yourself, is like, when was the last time you changed your mind about something? Right? That's perhaps a good litmus test for growth. So that's what strong opinions loosely held is to me. Right? It's just like being open, having an open mind, and being open to having your mind changed. And because it's so easy to, in the infinite scroll of today, to click on the article that supports your view or your hypothesis or whatever, right? It's a lot harder to click on the article where your gut reaction is like, oh, what a goofball, what an idiot, you know? Like, maybe click on it sometime. Like, read it. Sure, it might be garbage, but like, at least expose yourself to the alternative viewpoint or alternative idea, and maybe there are some nuggets there. So that,
yeah, absolutely. Or sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, so that's, and how has it served me? It's like, I don't think I really developed this well until I got into grad school, to be perfectly honest, because that's when I started to like really embed science and the process of science into my own personal being, right? And so it served me after that point, I think, is where I did a lot of growing up. Was, you know, I had different opinions about things, and I was much more open to being like, well, actually, you're right, that I have been doing this poorly. This is a much better way to do this. So yeah, it served me well in multiple situations over and over and over again, right?
For sure. I think just like that kind of the mantra of being open to change is a really powerful tool. And like, and the fact of, you know, you never really know if you do open yourself and give yourself that opportunity to think about from a different perspective, or, you know, really try to listen to somebody in a conversation. Like the point you mentioned of opening a news article, it might be against your basis opinion, but if you just read it, I'm sure it might make you a little bit uncomfortable when you read it or you listen to it, for example. But by the time after, if you really take the time to be introspective of what you've just absorbed, you might have the opportunity to kind of be like, hey, you know, things are actually different than the way that I thought beforehand. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I kind of want to tie this idea to is, say, like, in a student's, like, trajectory of, like, how they want to go after they graduate. Like, sure. I think for example, like a student innovation center is great because
Sure.
I know one of the things you were talking about beforehand is like when the students were building the mantras or like a gadget, for example, they were almost more interested in working on that specific gadget than they were of studying for their midterm, because it's like, I think to some extent maybe the students can feel that they have like a why for why they're working on that specific point of time, whereas say like if they're just doing a midterm, they're like, I don't really know what I'm getting from like my physics or chemistry class at that point in time. So what I'm like kind of curious on is like, how do you think like students who are like unfamiliar of like what they want to do and say like their career path afterwards, like how do you think they can like find like a why for what they want to do afterwards?
Yeah, that's a tough question, David. I mean, do I have a personal why right now? I'm not sure. I'm working on something that's extremely important. It's important to me. I believe it to be incredibly important to the planet, and I believe it to be worth all of the energy I can apply to it. Do I consider it my reason for existence, I guess is what I'm saying. No, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe in this idea of raison d'être, But so like finding a personal, basically we're talking about like finding interests and finding something you can go deep on, right? And how to explore that. And the university part is separate because I have other ideas about universities. But like in terms of like sampling new experiences, you have to sample new experiences, right? If you're going to find what's interesting to you. And maybe your personal why is buried in there, but like Tyler, you mentioned earlier, like it's a feedback system, right? Life is a feedback system. There's a reason people make so many career changes over time because they're sampling life in a different way. And so when you're in university, I think it's like the more you can sample new and interesting experiences and work experiences and side projects and places to live and all of these things, it's just so important for shaping what matters to you. I think you're like kind of like an ensemble of your experiences and the people who are around you, and you can shape that ensemble by deciding where and what you're going to try out. There are certainly people who can go through university and single-minded. They know what they're going to do, and they execute on it, and they do it, and then they do the next thing, and they do the next thing. That was never me. There are lots of those individuals, I think, but there are more individuals, I think, in undergrad who are truly lost, they can't forge a connection to the future, right? Because they're getting a degree because someone told them they should, because social pressure tells them they should, because there's a perceived barrier to entry to the job market that is here. You need to be here, right? So, I don't know. We could go deep on the philosophy of what is university for, right? But I think if you want to find your why, right, you have to be open to all these new experiences. But at the same time, here's I think is an interesting caveat, is it can't be so willy-nilly that you're going to toss something away when it gets a little bit difficult. You can't.
So this is actually something I wanted to tie into I know your thoughts on this is, when you take this approach to life and that I'm going to try everything, I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and I'm going to get all this feedback. A lot of the fears are irrational, but sometimes you will get some very bad feedback and you're going to fail at things and you're going to have a lot of adversity.
Sure.
And how can you, like, that's just inevitable when you do that. So it's how do you frame your relationship with adversity and difficulty and failure to kind of use it to maybe, what's your relationship with it, like, I guess, in terms of a growth model?
I mean, my relationship with failure right now is like it's embedded into how we operate. Like, we're a startup, right? We have lots of micro failures that we need to very quickly learn from and iterate on and change. In my life, like there wasn't a time where I felt like I made a big, giant failure, a big, massive failure. Like, I'd love to be able to tell you that I had this massive failure and I learned from it, but I didn't. There were certainly times where things didn't go as well as I planned. But I've always been able to kind of recuperate and look to what's next. And yeah, so failure in startup life, that's part of the package, right? Things are gonna mess up. Science failure happens all the bloody time. Maybe that's where I found some more resilience with failure, Tyler, is like when you're in grad school and you're doing science, like the amount of times you feel like you're winning is very small, right? Like grad studies, it is hard. Like it is a crucible for resilience. There's a reason that mental health problems are so high in grad studies, because you go in day after day, and as a scientist, I shouldn't hope that an experiment results in a certain way, but I want it to, because I got to get the paper and I got to do the next thing, right? And if nothing's working over and over and over again, that is such a painful experience, right? So there's grit in there too. It's like part of dealing with failure is grit and just like stick-to-itiveness, whatever you want to call that. And part of failure and me approaching failure is like realizing when I'm failing repeatedly on the same thing, and when I can ask, okay, I need to bring some help in because I'm spinning my wheels on a problem. But I've always felt like, oh, I failed here, but if there's something within my control that I could change, then it's worth trying again. I always had to like remove the variable of me. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, for sure. I think, the one point I can attest on there as well, because I did a master's degree, is it can be kind of very mentally difficult at times, because, you feel like you should be making progress in like either your research or like your education, but you can just go on long stretches where you literally feel like there's no change for a month or 2 months, and it can be like very taxing if you're kind of a growth-minded person, or if you are like an achiever per se, because you might not have anything on paper after like 2 months. And I remember, one thing I wanted to share is I met a really great guy in my master's program, and he said something to me that I thought was great. He's like this. He's like, because he was maybe a year or two senior than me, he said, if you can learn one new thing every day during your master's program, you're doing a great job. And I had to like think about that for a second. I was like, but I haven't finished a paper. I haven't even started my paper. Like I hadn't done anything at that point. And he just said that, and I thought about it. And then like retrospectively, going back and looking after I had graduated, like, I mean, obviously the papers came and the conferences and everything, but it's very right. And just kind of like that idea of probably being more patient along this path can help a lot too. And maybe, one of the things I'm kind of curious on, Chris, is like, during the times of your career growth in your life that you had like maybe some uncertainties on like what you've wanted to do, like how have you kind of like thought about like the patience of thinking through your decisions, and maybe like thinking through like the mental health aspect, a little bit of that?
Yeah, where have I had uncertainty? I'm trying to think back to, there was a time in grad studies where I thought I was going to quit. That's for sure. There was a lot of uncertainty. Gets really hard, right? Gets super, super hard. And I was like, I don't know if this is right for me, if this is the right place for me. Every grad student goes through this, I swear. It's just a rite of passage. But, and people approach this soul-searching portion of grad studies differently. I don't know if it happens as much in undergrad as maybe it should. But, like that was just like a forcing function for me to decide like how much is finishing this worth my time. Do I really need what's at the end of this? Can I make something beautiful about what I've done so far? Maybe I should switch groups or whatever. I talked to several people. I talked to people I trusted. I talked to my partner, certainly. Like, I talked her ear off about it, right? And, well, you make a decision. Like, it's that was probably the most recent example of uncertainty I feel like that I was able to slow down and methodically assess the situation, right? But a lot of other periods in my life, like I haven't been methodical on a lot of decisions of my life that were really probably quite impactful. Serendipity matters a lot, and opportunity matters a lot. Like sometimes I've made pretty big decisions that I probably could have slowed down on quite a bit. Like the BCIT example was a good one, right? Like certainly I was searching, but like when I had found that program and made the decision, that the period of time where I assessed it and thought it was interesting, it wasn't like I was looking ahead into the grand scheme of things. It was like at the time I felt a good connection between what that program was offering and my skills and my interests, and so I went for it. Like I think there are probably people who can sit there and try to structure a narrative for their life. There are methodologies you can go about, 80,000 hours. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that website. Like there are frameworks that students can use for planning their career if this idea of impact is very important to them. You want to feel like you're making a difference, that you're leaving the world in a bit better state than when you arrived. There are frameworks for doing that, right? But there's also like nothing wrong in life with not finishing university and starting the best ramen noodle shop in the world. Like,
I think that speaks a lot to having a good relationship with yourself too, because it's like if you have a good relationship with yourself, you'll trust yourself to be like, nah, university's not for me. I'm going to start that ramen noodle shop. It's going to be the best one in the world, and I know it because I know who I am, right? And so I think another thing I'm wondering about is I think it's important to develop, in that sense, a good relationship for yourself, and I think that's critical in high tempo situations like you've been in. Like you've done grad studies, you're in the startup world now, and so you've been doing this for many years. So I'm wondering, are there certain routines or rituals that happen on a daily, weekly basis, some anchors that you have that you can kind of always come back to in times of days that are highly stressful with lots of micro failures, or when your job is demanding a lot of time for you? What are some things that you use to keep yourself kind of grounded in that sense?
Yeah, like again, I'd like to tell you that I meditate every morning, and then after I don't. I certainly have. I can recognize in my life where I feel like I probably need more introspection, and I'll spend a period of time where I'll meditate for weeks on end, or I might take up more exercise or something like this. But I'm not a very routine individual. I'm sorry to admit it to you, but like there aren't many things where I sit down and I do them routinely. I value the idea of these things. They're probably quite important, and I think lots of individuals can benefit from them. Don't get me wrong, but for me, I've always thought it would be great to journal every day. Have I journaled every day? No, I have not journaled every day. Have I journaled for periods of time and reaped benefits during those times? Yes, I have. And so maybe that was good enough, because like I got what I needed from that method at the time to get me through, right? Like it's I don't need to chase a blissful state of being, right? I just want I feel like I'm well equipped to deal with stressful situations with a host of methodologies that exist. And simple things too, just like sitting down and looking outside and staring at something far away, walking up to the window. This is what I do. I'll go for a quick walk. I call it, I'm going for a brain break. Turn off the phone, go for a brain break. Just little simple things. It's like, if you're constantly, you guys heard of Gupta? I forget his last name. Oh, I'll have to send it to you. But
is he a yoga or like a mind thought?
No, he's got this book called Direct Truth.
Okay.
Anyways, Kapil Gupta, beautiful individual. But like he has a thing where he talks about prescriptions and the folly of chasing prescriptions. And I felt like for a while that I was seeking the next prescription for something, right? Like, if I follow this workout plan, that it will get me to where I want to be, and I will be happy. If I follow this meditation scheme, it will get me where I want to be, right? I think you have to be cognizant of like, when should you make your own prescription versus like, when should you chase prescriptions, and when do you have too many prescriptions perhaps on your plate, and you might want to discard one or two. So, sorry, I wish I had something meatier for you, but I wake up and I make breakfast totally okay. And it's 2 pieces of bacon. No, I don't do that.
I like I like the staring out at a tree or something like that. I remember growing up, I would always ask my dad sometimes, we'd be eating dinner together.
Yeah.
And I'd see my dad would just be zoning out on something as we were eating. He'd just be staring at something for 30 seconds. And I'd be like, what are you looking at? He's like, I'm relaxing my brain. I'm like, okay, sounds good. I hope that's effective for you.
Yeah, there's ways to relax your brain, and then there's coping, right? How do you cope with a difficult scenario? I could tell you one of my coping mechanisms when I'm feeling stressed or I've got a headache or something is I have a bath. I just have a hot bath and I chill out. And that's the simple thing for me that is probably the most repetitive behavior I have for wanting to relax or cope with a bunch of things that's going on in my head, as I'll just have a tub.
Love it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, you just got to know what it is about you that you need, I guess, right?
I think so.
And it is a good answer, because I think at least I have this notion that people that are successful in the startup world and everything, or have these really diligent routines where it's I get up at this hour and I do this thing, and I have every half an hour block of my day planned, and I meditate twice and I journal and stuff like that. So it's nice, it's refreshing to hear that that's not necessary, and you don't need all those prescriptions too. You operate at a high level, and you don't need any of that. You can just understand what you need at that specific moment, maybe for a short period of time.
Not to say I won't do these things in the future here, guys. I do what I have time for, and if I wanted to do these things, I would have to steal that time from comfort, right? So I have certainly done the miracle mornings up at 4, done that for a month on end, and loved it when I was doing it. It's the tricky thing with these prescriptions, right? Is how durable are they to change in your life? And I found that many of these prescriptions that I have tried anyways are not as durable as I would have liked them to be, or perhaps I didn't put enough effort into making them durable. There always seems to be a thing that pops up and, oh, jeez, it's really rainy. Maybe I won't go for a run today. Or, I can't find my notebook. So much for journaling today, or whatever.
Yeah. And then I guess you learn that maybe it wasn't that, important in your life at the end of the day at the same time, right? It's a good litmus test for how much you need it, because it's if you really needed that run, you would have gone for it. If you needed to journal, and then maybe it's a good test for whether it should be a permanent placement in your routine.
Yeah. I have met folks who they have these routines that they've been going for years, and if they break that routine, it causes them angst. I have to go for a run. It's 11:30 at night. I must do this, right? This is what I do. I just haven't been that kind of person.
It's funny you say that. There's a few things I'm that type of person with. I have the layers of my onion, and a few of these prescriptions that I have are the inner layer or the bottom row of the house of cards. It's if I stop doing it, so many things are built on top of that. It's what am I going to do? So there's a few things I know I'm stuck with for life.
Yeah,
for sure. And it's I don't mind it. I like it. I enjoy it. It gives me an anchor. But that's not for everybody at the same time, I guess. But it's like we said about knowing yourself.
Yeah. It's we talked about startups a little bit, and knowing yourself or whatever, and just the broad spectrum skill I think that you should cultivate is self-awareness as much as possible, right? And really asking yourself hard questions, and and not expecting to know everything and know the answers right away. It's just like, it's okay to say, I don't know where I'm going, but I'll figure this out later. Like, it's okay to live in uncertainty for a while.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. That's a good little piece of wisdom for us to end on. So that was really great, Chris. Thank you very much for everything that you shared with us today.
Thanks, guys.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. A little off the cuff, but
Yeah. Little roll. I know we sent you some show notes ahead of time, but me and Dave like to, kind of go off the rails a little bit if we think something's interesting. And you said a lot of interesting things, so I know we kind of went off the rails a little bit. But
no worries, guys. Honestly, like I don't like to read that stuff much because it just doesn't feel authentic when I'm sitting there talking to you. I want you to get the real me, right? Mm-hmm. And if I'm going off a scripted answer or something, I feel like I'm cheating you, right? Yeah. I'm not giving you that authentic reaction to something you're asking, right? I don't know. And then what Oprah would always say is like, if you script the interview, you always miss the most important question, which is the follow-up question, right?
Yep. Right. The listening and then basically asking with like what you're hearing at that particular point in time.
Yeah. Really stoked on what you guys are doing, guys. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's it's kind of like I appreciate that. It's like you said, like I don't think me and Dave right now are all that different from like students in university that are trying to start a project. Like neither of us have ever started a podcast before. We don't know what it's like. Like we're kind of just randomly getting people on here and asking these questions and figuring out kind of the value prop as we go and stuff like that. Totally. And it's been a ton of fun.
That's awesome.
And it's awesome to do it with Dave and awesome getting guests like you on. So
that's cool.
The whole experience has been like awesome so far, and it makes me want to keep on doing it. So
that's great.
But it's a lot of unknown like we talked about today.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, that was Chris. Hope you all enjoyed it. It was really great having that discussion with him. He had a lot of good points. That's a guy with a super, interesting, diverse journey so far that's done a little bit of everything, and he's landed in a spot where he's extremely happy and feels like he's contributing to something meaningful. And so I know I got a lot out of it. I hope you guys did too. Dave, what did you think?
Yeah, really enjoyed the interview. I feel like although Chris is maybe a little bit different, say like in terms of background than some of the other guests that we've had on the show so far, his experience as probably, if not as like it's like the way he thinks about things is very abstract, which I think is actually great for say like in context of students. And he spends so much time talking with students already, like when he was in the innovation center. So like he has so much good information. I took, per usual, took a ton of notes. And I know we're only gonna have a little bit of time to share some of these things. So maybe I'll kind of just quickly, this is one I really like. He says periods of life that don't seem relevant are actually relevant. And like, cause he was talking about his experience of like basically just taking time off and going snowboarding and things like that. And I talked to some friends and they seem so linearly focused on their career. They're just like this. Whereas actually what I realized is like people who can kind of use their different experiences, but in like a constructive way, like they have such good insight into like how things work and like why the world works in certain ways, rather than like if you just only focus time on your career, you're only just getting good and deep in like probably one area or like a few areas. But if you do all these other things, you have so much. And then I want to tie one other thing I read, note I have with that. And that is you can never go wrong with reaping the benefits of having social skills. So I think Chris mentions like he gets a lot out of the social skills he developed from the different experience he had. And like, I mean, I can completely agree. It's like, as long as you can continue to develop your social skills over time, like the sky's the limit. Tyler?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. There was a lot of good nuggets in there, especially with the social skills like you touched on in the end. And also the point you were mentioning about how, there was a lot of things that didn't seem relevant. But I think the quote that I like from that is that he said he told someone at the company he's at now, Future Fields, he says, I'm using every single piece of my experience in this company so far. So all the things that he didn't realize were adding up to something. He's using all of that right now. Pretty interesting too that, it makes sense where he is because he originally stopped university because he couldn't see the connection to the future from what he was doing there. So he's somebody that, is very honest with himself and kind of knows what's right, or when he should quit something, when he should stop something. And that's kind of the point he touched on too, was his main thing that I really enjoyed was the broad spectrum skill you should cultivate is self-awareness. That was the point that he made. It seems like he's put a lot of effort into that. And he sampled a lot of things to be able to do that. So no, I thought it was extremely interesting. And just another thing too about how it's funny how we've heard this a few times. Like he said, he wanted to go do investigate nanotechnology just because he heard the word nanotechnology to start with. And then he got fascinated with it and drawn towards it. What did Karina say in the other episode, that she was interested just because she watched that show Mayday on TV? And, in an upcoming interview, you'll see another one of those where it's just this little happen chance thing that you just hear a word or see a scene. Or I think it was even Clara that wanted to get into consulting because she liked the idea of the consultant lifestyle and stuff like that. So it can be something as small as that could just kind of piques your interest that you have to listen to. And it seems to pay dividends to people that pay attention to that kind of gut feeling. So I thought that was interesting as well. But yeah, definitely really interesting guy. Thinks abstract, like you said. And I know every time I speak with him, I take away something new. I get a new viewpoint. So it was really enjoyable for us. And we hope that you guys enjoyed it too.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. And as always, Tyler and I in every single end of the episode, if you're still listening, please give a like and a subscribe. It helps us get more people coming to our YouTube channel, helps us get better guests, more interesting stories to share with you guys. And thank you for the support as always. And we'll see you next time.
Please do smash that like, leave a comment.
Boom.